32 years old, 7 months pregnant with their miracle child. Her birthday. An opulent New York penthouse, an army of staff she'd dismissed for the day, wanting only him. But Seraphina Vance ate her custom-baked La Maison du Chocolat cake alone. While her husband, the celebrated tech mogul Julian Vance, was supposedly sealing a multi-billion-dollar deal in Tokyo, he was actually 30,000 feet over the Atlantic. Destination Paris. Seat first class. Companion. Not his wife. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a saga of breathtaking betrayal, corporate espionage, and a woman who had everything lost it all and then decided to burn their gilded cage to the ground. Stay tuned if you think you know how this ends. You don't. Seraphina Vance traced the rim of her champagne flute, filled with sparkling cider, a concession to the precious life nestled within her. The crystal a baccarat, Harcourt felt cold against her fingertips, a stark contrast to the warmth she'd craved from her husband, Julian. 32. Today was her 32nd birthday, and she was achingly, deafeningly alone in their sprawling 3-story penthouse overlooking Central Park. The apartment, usually a hive of activity, with staff catering to their every whim, was silent. She'd given them the day off, picturing an intimate celebration with Julian, whispered sweet nothings, his hand on her burgeoning belly, the city lights twinkling below as they reminisced and dreamed. Instead, a single slice of her favorite chocolate truffle cake from La Maison du Chocolat sat before her, its richness a mockery of the hollowness in her chest. Julian, her brilliant, charismatic, workaholic husband. He'd called 2 days ago, his voice crackling with feigned regret over a staticky line. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. The Kaito deal in Tokyo. It's hit a snag. I have to fly out tonight. I'll be back before you know it, and we'll celebrate properly, I promise." Extravagantly. She'd understood, or at least pretended to. Julian Vance, CEO of Vance Innovations, didn't get to where he was by missing crucial international deals. Their life, their penthouse, their future child's legacy. It was all built on his relentless ambition. So she'd smiled into the phone, wished him luck, and told him she loved him, her heart sinking with each word. The promised bouquet of rare orchids hadn't arrived. No courier bearing a velvet box from Cartier, his usual makeup gesture. Not even a text since that brief call. Just an echoing silence in their palatial home, broken only by the distant wail of a siren. As evening bled into night, Seraphina wrapped a cashmere throw around her shoulders. The baby, whom they'd affectionately nicknamed Pip, gave a gentle kick as if sensing her melancholy. "Oh, Pip," she whispered, stroking her stomach. "Daddy's busy making the world spin, I suppose." She wandered into Julian's home office, a sleek expanse of mahogany and chrome. He was usually meticulously organized, but a stray file lay open on his otherwise pristine desk. It wasn't work-related. It looked like personal travel itineraries. Her brow furrowed. Tokyo was east. This flight path seemed west. A chilling premonition snaked its way up her spine. With trembling fingers, she picked up the printout. It was a confirmation from Air France La Première. Passenger names Julian Vance and Ms. Chloé Dubois. Destination Paris. Charles de Gaulle. Arrival this morning. Paris time. Her birthday. The world tilted. La Première. Their most exclusive, opulent first-class suite. The one Julian had once said was reserved for an anniversary trip just for us. Her breath hitched. Chloé Dubois. The name was vaguely familiar. An intern from the marketing department. No, that wasn't it. An aspiring actress Julian had briefly mentored, or so he'd claimed after a charity gala last spring. Seraphina had dismissed her as a harmless flutter of youthful ambition around her powerful husband. Clearly she had been catastrophically wrong. Tokyo, the Kaito deal, all a lie. A meticulously crafted deception so he could whisk another woman away to the most romantic city in the world, in the most luxurious way possible, while his pregnant wife sat alone on her birthday. The slice of cake on the counter suddenly seemed obscene. The baccarat crystal, a cruel joke. The baby kicked again harder this time, and a single hot tear escaped Seraphina's eye, tracing a path down her cheek before splashing onto the damning itinerary. It was followed by another and another, until she was sinking to the plush carpet, the sound of her own ragged sobs finally filling the oppressive silence of their gilded cage. The initial shock was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs, leaving her gasping. Then came the searing pain, a visceral agony that clawed at her insides, more potent than any physical ailment. It wasn't just the affair. It was the calculated cruelty, the depth of the deception. Paris, La Première, Chloé Dubois. Each detail was a fresh stab to her already bleeding heart. For hours, Seraphina lay on the floor of Julian's office, the itinerary clutched in her hand, the paper crinkled and damp from her tears. The city lights outside, once a symbol of their shared success, now seemed to mock her, their glittering indifference, a reflection of Julian's own. Pip stirred within her, a reminder of the innocent life caught in this maelstrom of deceit. This couldn't be just a momentary lapse of foolish indiscretion. The planning, the lies about Tokyo, the sheer audacity of it all, pointed to something more entrenched, more insidious, with a resolve she didn't know she possessed. Seraphina pushed herself up. Her reflection in the darkened window was a stranger. Pale eyes swollen, but with a flicker of something new in their depths. A chilling stillness. She needed proof, irrefutable proof. Not just the itinerary, but something that would strip away any possibility of denial, any chance for Julian to gaslight her, to twist the narrative. Her mind, usually clouded by love and trust, began to clear, sharpened by betrayal. Julian was careless, arrogant. He would have left other traces. She started with his laptop, rarely touched by her. His password, ironically, was Sarah Pip Love. The bitter taste of bile rose in her throat. The browse history was wiped clean, of course. But his cloud storage linked to his phone was a gold mine he'd overlooked in his haste. There they were, photos, dozens of them stretching back months. Julian and Chloé laughing intimately at a secluded beach club in St. Bart's. Chloé draped in jewels, Seraphina now recognized as missing from her own collection. Gifts Julian had claimed were at the jeweler's for cleaning. Chloé preening in the bathroom of what looked suspiciously like their Hamptons weekend house. And then the most recent, a selfie of Chloé champagne flute in hand. Real champagne, of course, in an Air France La Première suite, a sliver of Julian's bespoke Savile Row suit visible beside her. The timestamp was from yesterday. Her phone. He'd insisted they link their Find My Phone accounts for safety. She opened the app. Julian's phone wasn't in Tokyo. It was pinging directly from the 8th arrondissement of Paris, near the Champs-Élysées. Specifically, from the vicinity of the Hotel Plaza Athénée, one of the most luxurious and romantic hotels in the city. The hotel where Julian had taken her on their honeymoon. The symbolism was like a physical assault. Each discovery was a fresh wave of nausea. This wasn't a new affair. This was a parallel life. She thought back to all the late nights at the office, the sudden business trips, the subtle shifts in his affection she'd dismissed as stress. How blind had she been? Or had she simply chosen not to see? The door to the penthouse chimed. Her heart leaped into her throat. Julian. No, it couldn't be. It was past midnight. Peeking through the security monitor, she saw her younger sister Genevieve, her face etched with concern. Seraphina buzzed her in a wave of relief washing over her. If there was one person in the world she could trust, it was Jen. Genevieve rushed in her eyes, scanning Seraphina's tear-streaked face. Sarah, oh my God, what happened? I've been calling you all evening. You weren't answering. I got a weird feeling. Happy birthday, by the way, though you don't look very happy. Seraphina's composure crumbled again. She wordlessly handed Genevieve the printed itinerary and then the tablet displaying the photos. Jen's expression shifted from concern to disbelief, then to a cold, hard fury that mirrored Seraphina's own burgeoning anger. That absolute bastard! Genevieve breathed, her voice low and dangerous. Paris with her. On your birthday. While you're pregnant with his child. He told me it was Tokyo. Seraphina whispered, her voice hoarse. A vital business deal. Business my ass, Jen spat. He's flaunting this. La première. The Plaza Athénée. He's not even trying to be discreet with her. This isn't just cheating, Sarah. This is a declaration of war. Genevieve, ever the pragmatist, took charge. Okay, no more tears. Not for him. We need to think. What do you want to do? Seraphina looked at her sister, the blurry image of her life snapping into sharp, painful focus. The love she thought was the bedrock of her existence was a lie. The man she adored was a stranger. But the baby inside her was real. Her love for Pip was real. I want... Seraphina started, her voice trembling, but gaining strength. I want to understand how deep this goes. And then, I want to make him pay. For everything. Genevieve nodded, a grim smile on her face. Good. Because I know just the person to help us with that. He owes me a favor, and he's the best divorce lawyer in New York. But first we gather more ammunition. Let's see what else Mr. Vance has been hiding. Together they delved deeper, sifting through digital footprints, financial statements accessible through shared accounts, and Julian's carelessly unsecured personal email, which he rarely used but had clearly accessed recently to forward the flight confirmation from his primary. It appeared Chloe Dubois wasn't just a paramour. She was an expensive one. There were charges for designer clothes, lavish dinners, even rent for a luxury apartment in Soho. Funds diverted from accounts Seraphina had believed were for joint investments. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. He was systematically draining their shared future to fund his affair. He's not just breaking your heart, Sarah, Genevieve said, her eyes blazing. He's trying to break your bank too. This isn't just an affair. This is a long con. The last vestiges of Seraphina's sorrow began to transmute into a cold, hard rage. Julian Vance had underestimated her. He had mistaken her gentle nature for weakness, her love for naivety. He was about to discover how wrong he was. The game was on. While Seraphina and Genevieve were uncovering the grotesque tapestry of Julian's deceit in New York, Julian Vance himself was living out a Parisian fantasy. He and Chloe Dubois were ensconced in a suite at the Hotel Plaza Athénée, the iconic red geraniums cascading from their balcony, the Eiffel Tower glittering in the distance. Chloe, a striking redhead, with sharp features and an even sharper ambition, was reveling in the luxury. She was 24 in age, where the allure of a powerful, wealthy older man like Julian was intoxicating. He'd promised her the world, and for now he seemed to be delivering. First-class flights, 5-star hotels, dinners at Le Jules Verne, and shopping sprees on Avenue Montaigne. "Isn't this divine, Jules?" Chloe purred, sipping champagne, as she admired a new diamond bracelet on her wrist, a little something Julian had picked up from Van Cleef & Arpels. "Paris agrees with me." Julian smiled, a practiced, charming smile that rarely reached his eyes these days. "Only the best for you, my dear." But even amidst the opulence, a sliver of unease pricked at him. He'd called Seraphina with the Tokyo excuse, and her acceptance had been too easy. Seraphina, despite her quiet demeanor, was perceptive. He'd half expected more questions, a touch of suspicion. Her silence was unsettling. He'd also been careless with that itinerary. He distinctly remembered printing it in his office. Had he shredded it? He thought so. But a nagging doubt remained. "What's wrong, darling?" Chloe asked, noticing the fleeting shadow on his face. "You seem distracted." "Just business," he lied smoothly, topping up her champagne. "The Kaito deal. It's complex." He needed to maintain the fiction, even with Chloe. She didn't need to know the full extent of his web, or how much this Parisian jaunt was costing him, not just financially, but potentially in terms of his carefully constructed life. The truth was, Vance Innovations wasn't as unshakable as it appeared. A recent hostile takeover bid from a rival Marcus Thorne of Thorne Industries had put him under immense pressure. The Kaito deal was real, and it was crucial, but his top negotiator was handling the initial stages in Tokyo. Julian had planned to fly in for the final signing later in the week, using the time difference to his advantage, hoping Seraphina would be none the wiser about his Parisian detour. It was a reckless gamble, juggling corporate survival with a high-stakes affair. Chloe, however, was growing impatient. She hadn't maneuvered her way into Julian Vance's life just for trinkets and fancy trips. She wanted the ultimate prize to be Mrs. Vance. "When are you going to tell her, Julian?" she asked, her voice losing its playful lilt. "About us." "You said soon. You said after the baby, but that seems so far away, and so complicated." Julian stiffened. "We've discussed this, Chloe. The timing has to be perfect. A scandal right now could jeopardize everything. The company, my reputation, Seraphina, is delicate, especially now with the pregnancy." He hated using the pregnancy as a shield, yet it was his most convenient excuse. Chloe's eyes narrowed. "Delicate or inconvenient? Don't mistake me for a fool, Julian. I know what I bring to your life. Youth, excitement. I'm not going to be your dirty little secret forever." "And you won't be," he said, trying to placate her. But the pressure was mounting from all sides. Thorne's relentless pursuit, the demanding Kaito negotiations, Chloe's increasing possessiveness, and the gnawing fear that Seraphina might discover the truth. His empire, built on audacious risks and ruthless decisions, felt like it was teetering on the brink. Back in New York, Seraphina was no longer the weeping woman on the floor. Fueled by coffee and a steely resolve, she and Genevieve had worked through the night. They'd contacted Gavin Fletcher, the shark of a divorce lawyer Jen had mentioned. Fletcher, a man whose reputation for dismantling powerful philanderers was legendary, had agreed to a preliminary consultation the next morning, intrigued by the high-profile nature of the case and the sheer audacity of Julian's betrayal. "He's not just cheating Mrs. Vance," Fletcher had said over the phone, his voice crisp and devoid of sentiment. He's committing financial dissipation of marital assets. That Air France La Première ticket, that's Exhibit A. The Plaza Athénée, Exhibit B. We're going to build a timeline that will make his eyes water. Seraphina had also made another call. To a discreet private investigator, Fletcher recommended a woman named Anya Sharma, known for her subtlety and tech savviness. Anya's brief was simple document Julian's Parisian jaunt with Chloe, every dinner, every shopping trip, every public display of affection. And more importantly, dig into Chloe Dubois. Who was she really? What were her motivations? Was she a naive girl caught in Julian's web, or a calculating player in her own right? One more thing. Sarah, Genevieve said, her finger hovering over a folder on Julian's cloud drive, labeled Vance Inov, confidential personal. It wasn't password protected beyond the main login. This looks like company stuff, but it's in his personal cloud. Maybe there's something here. Inside were documents that made little sense to Seraphina at first. Spreadsheets, internal memos, drafts of contracts. But one file name caught her eye, Project Nightingale, contingency funding. It detailed a series of offshore accounts and shell corporations. Some of the transactions looked suspiciously like the amounts Julian had been lavishing on Chloe. Is he embezzling from his own company? Seraphina whispered, horrified. Genevieve's eyes widened. If he is, and this gets out, Thorn Industries will have a field day. He could lose everything, even go to jail. The stakes had just escalated exponentially. This was no longer just about a broken heart and a ruined marriage. This was about corporate fraud, high-stakes business rivalries, and the potential for a spectacular public downfall. Seraphina felt a grim satisfaction. Julian had lit the match. She was now gathering the kerosene. The Parisian love nest was about to become the epicenter of an earthquake. 3 days later, Julian Vance returned to New York, not from Tokyo, but from Paris. He'd cut the trip short, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. Chloe had become increasingly demanding, her possessiveness bordering on suffocating. More than that, his brief, stilted phone calls with Seraphina had been unnerving. Her responses were too calm, too polite. The lack of her usual warmth was more alarming than any accusation would have been. He'd landed at JFK, concocting a story about the Kaito deal, progressing faster than expected, allowing him an early return. He anticipated tears, perhaps some anger about his absence on her birthday, but nothing he couldn't manage with a carefully chosen gift, a stunning sapphire necklace he'd picked up in Paris, ironically on a street near where Chloe had been shopping, and his well-practiced charm. He walked into the penthouse, the sapphire necklace in a velvet box in his pocket, calling out, "Sweetheart, I'm home." The apartment was immaculate, but there was an unfamiliar chill in the air. Seraphina emerged from the study, not the tearful, forgiving wife he expected, but a woman he barely recognized. Her expression was serene, almost unnervingly calm. She wasn't wearing the maternity clothes he was used to seeing her in. Instead, she wore a tailored dress that, while accommodating her pregnancy, also conveyed an air of cool professionalism. "Julian," she said, her voice even devoid of its usual affection. "Welcome back. How was Tokyo?" The slight emphasis on Tokyo was like a shard of ice down his spine. "Productive," he said, forcing a smile. "Very productive. I missed you terribly. Happy belated birthday, my love." He moved to embrace her to present the necklace, but she subtly sidestepped him. "Please sit down, Julian," she said, gesturing towards the living area. Genevieve was there, an equally composed expression on her face, standing beside a man Julian didn't recognize, tall, impeccably dressed with the predatory stillness of a hawk. This was Gavin Fletcher. Julian's blood ran cold. This wasn't a welcome home. It was an ambush. "What's going on, Seraphina?" he asked, his voice losing its confident timbre. "Who is this?" "This is Gavin Fletcher," Seraphina replied, her gaze unwavering. "My legal counsel." Julian felt a wave of panic. "Legal counsel? What on earth for?" "For this," Seraphina said, and with a nod to Genevieve, a large screen on the wall flickered to life. It displayed a crystal-clear photograph of Julian and Chloe, arm in arm, laughing as they exited the Hotel Plaza Athénée. Then another of them dining at an intimate restaurant. Then another Chloe showing off a new designer handbag, Julian beaming beside her. The final image was a copy of the Air France La Première manifest, with their names highlighted. Julian stared aghast. His carefully constructed world was imploding. "Seraphina, I can explain." "Can you?" she asked, her voice dangerously soft. "Can you explain why you told me you were in Tokyo saving our company when you were actually in Paris on my birthday with Ms. Chloe Dubois? Can you explain the apartment you rented for her in Soho, the jewelry, the St. Bart's trip? Or perhaps this?" The screen changed again, displaying a simplified flowchart of the Project Nightingale accounts, showing funds being diverted. Julian's face blanched. This was far worse than he could have imagined. She knew. She knew everything. This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, looking from Seraphina to Fletcher, then to Genevieve, whose expression was pure contempt. "Those company files are confidential. How did you get them?" "You left them on your personal cloud, Julian," Seraphina said. "Much like you left your affair wide open for me to discover. You've become arrogant, sloppy." Gavin Fletcher stepped forward. "Mr. Vance, my client. Mrs. Vance is filing for divorce on grounds of adultery and extreme cruelty. Furthermore, we have evidence of significant financial dissipation of marital assets, and these Project Nightingale documents, they suggest something far more serious. Embezzlement, perhaps. Fraud." Julian's mind raced. This was a disaster. A public divorce, accusations of fraud. Marcus Thorne would crucify him. The Kaito deal would collapse. His career, his reputation, everything would be ruined. "Seraphina, please," he pleaded. Turning to her, his arrogance replaced by a desperate fear. "We can talk about this. Just us. Don't do this." He reached for her hand. Seraphina pulled away, as if his touch burned her. "There's nothing left to talk about, Julian. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." Her eyes, cold and clear, held no trace of the woman who had adored him. "You wanted a life with Chloe, fine. But you won't be funding it with my money, or money stolen from the company that bears your name, a name you've disgraced." "We have a settlement proposal, Mr. Vance," Fletcher interjected smoothly. "Given the circumstances, I trust you'll find it in your best interest to accept it swiftly and quietly, unless, of course, you'd prefer these documents find their way to the SEC, or perhaps to Marcus Thorne." The threat hung heavy in the air. Julian felt trapped, outmaneuvered. The woman he had dismissed, the wife he had so carelessly betrayed, was now holding all the cards. He looked at Seraphina, truly seeing her for the first time in years, not as an accessory to his success, but as a formidable opponent. And in her eyes, he saw no mercy, only justice. The penthouse, once his castle, now felt like a beautifully appointed prison. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft click of Gavin Fletcher's pen as he slid a document across the coffee table. The divorce petition. Julian was reeling. He retreated to a hotel, his mind a whirlwind of damage control. He had to salvage something, anything. His first instinct was to fight, to deny, to counter-sue. But Fletcher's veiled threat about the SEC and Marcus Thorne was potent. The Project Nightingale files were a ticking time bomb. He called Chloe, his voice strained. "There's a problem, a big one. Seraphina knows. Everything." Chloe's reaction wasn't one of sympathy. "Well, it's about time," she exclaimed, a triumphant note in her voice. "So she's finally out of the picture. When do I move into the penthouse?" Julian's stomach churned. "Chloe, you don't understand. She's not just leaving. She's trying to ruin me. She has lawyers' evidence. She even knows about Nightingale." A beat of silence. Nightingale. "What's that?" Chloe asked, her voice suddenly wary. "It doesn't matter," Julian snapped. "The point is, this Parisian trip, our whole arrangement, has blown up in my face. I need to lay low." "You need to lay low." "Lay low," Chloe scoffed. "Julian, you promised me a life, not a scandal I have to hide from. I sacrificed a lot for you." Sacrificed? Julian felt a surge of bitter anger. He was the one whose life was imploding. "I've given you everything. You've given me trinkets," she retorted. "I want the real prize. If Seraphina is fighting dirty, maybe I should talk to her, woman to woman, or perhaps to her lawyer. I have my own story to tell Julian, and my own evidence." The call ended acrimoniously, leaving Julian even more unnerved. Chloe, it seemed, was not the compliant plaything he'd imagined. She was a variable he hadn't properly accounted for. Meanwhile, Seraphina, guided by Fletcher and Anya Sharma, the PI was solidifying her position. Anya's Paris surveillance was impeccable, providing a detailed timeline of Julian's every move with Chloe. But Anya had also delved into Chloe Dubois's background, and what she found was illuminating. Chloe wasn't just an aspiring actress. She had a history of latching onto wealthy, influential men. There was a string of them, each affair ending when the man's wife found out, or when Chloe found a more promising target. She was a professional in her own way. Anya also uncovered something more current. Chloe had recently been in contact with a journalist from a notorious gossip publication, The City Serpent. It seems Ms. Dubois might be planning to leverage her story, Anya reported to Seraphina and Fletcher, either to pressure Julian or to get a hefty payout for an exclusive exposé. "Let her," Seraphina said, a thoughtful expression on her face. "If she wants to talk, perhaps we should listen. She might have information that could be useful beyond the divorce." Fletcher was cautious. "It's risky, Mrs. Vance. She could be a Trojan horse trying to gather intel for Julian. Or," Seraphina countered, "she could be someone who realizes Julian Vance is a sinking ship and is looking for the nearest lifeboat. He lied to her too, in his own way. He used her. Maybe she's starting to see that." Anya managed to arrange a discreet meeting. Seraphina, accompanied by Fletcher, observing silently, met Chloe Dubois in a private room at a neutral law office. Chloe entered with a practiced air of confidence, though Seraphina detected a flicker of nervousness in her eyes. She was beautiful, undeniably, but there was a hardness about her, a calculating glint that the Parisian photos hadn't captured. "Mrs. Vance?" Chloe began, her tone surprisingly formal. "Or should I say, Seraphina, I imagine this is awkward." "Ms. Dubois," Seraphina replied calmly. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries. My investigator tells me you might be looking to share your story. I'm curious as to why. Chloe leaned forward. Julian is a liar. He lied to you, and he lied to me. He promised me a future he had no intention of delivering. He told me your marriage was over a mere formality. He said you were cold, distant. Seraphina felt a pang, but quickly suppressed it. And you believed him? I wanted to, Chloe admitted. The life he offered was seductive. But I'm not a fool. When he called me from New York, panicked and trying to shut me down, I realized he was never going to leave you for me. Not really. I was just a diversion, an expensive hobby. So what do you want, Ms. Dubois? Fletcher interjected, his voice sharp. Chloe turned to him. I want what I'm owed, and I want to make sure Julian doesn't just walk away from this unscathed, leaving everyone else to pick up the pieces. He told me things about his business, about his rivals. Seraphina's interest piqued. What kind of things? He's terrified of Marcus Thorne, Chloe said. Thorne's been trying to take over Vance Innovations for months. Julian said Thorne was playing dirty, using corporate espionage, trying to find any weakness. She paused. And Julian? Julian has been cutting corners. Project Nightingale isn't just about siphoning off a bit of cash for personal use. It's deeper than that. It's a slush fund, yes, but it's also tied to some ethically grey areas in his tech development. Things he wouldn't want regulators or Thorne to know about, especially concerning data privacy in their new AI project. This was more than Seraphina had hoped for. Chloe wasn't just confirming the affair. She was offering a glimpse into the rotten core of Julian's business practices. Do you have any proof of these claims? Fletcher asked. Chloe smiled, a predatory flash. Julian is arrogant. He likes to boast. And sometimes he likes to record his inspirations. I might have a few voice memos and copies of some documents he carelessly left on his laptop when I was visiting his apartment. She named the Soho apartment Julian had rented for her. Seraphina exchanged a look with Fletcher. Chloe Dubois could be their ace in the hole, not just for the divorce, but for ensuring Julian faced the full consequences of his actions on a corporate level. What do you want in return for this information, Miss Dubois? Seraphina asked. Immunity from any legal blowback related to my association with Julian, Chloe stated, and a sum, enough to start over far away from this mess. Consider it compensation for services rendered and for my silence regarding certain aspects of my time with Julian that might be embarrassing for everyone. She glanced meaningfully at Seraphina's pregnant belly. Seraphina felt a wave of distaste, but recognized the strategic advantage. If your information is as valuable as you claim, and if you cooperate fully, we can discuss terms, she said. But any deal is contingent on your absolute discretion moving forward. No talking to the City Serpent or any other media outlet. Chloe nodded. Agreed. Julian Vance built his empire on illusions. It's time someone showed the world the man behind the curtain. As Chloe left, Fletcher turned to Seraphina. She's playing a dangerous game, but she might just have handed us the keys to the kingdom, or rather to dismantling Julian's kingdom. Seraphina felt a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. Julian's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also stripped the scales from her eyes. She was seeing the world and the man she had married with a brutal clarity, and she was discovering a strength within herself she never knew she possessed. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, Seraphina Vance felt like she was truly in control. Armed with Chloe's information, damning voice recordings of Julian boasting about cutting ethical corners with user data in Vance Innovations' new AI platform, Synapse, and copies of internal memos outlining the true extent of Project Nightingale. Seraphina and Fletcher had a decision to make. They could use it as leverage for a quicker, more lucrative divorce settlement, or they could take a bigger, riskier step. If what Chloe says is true, and these documents corroborate it, Fletcher mused, Julian isn't just facing divorce. He's facing serious regulatory investigations, shareholder lawsuits, and a catastrophic loss of public trust. Marcus Thorne would be the least of his worries if the SEC or the FTC got wind of this. Seraphina thought of Pip, of the future she wanted for her child, a future built on integrity, not on the spoils of deceit and unethical practices. She also thought of the employees at Vance Innovations, many of whom were good, hard-working people unknowingly caught in Julian's web. "I don't just want a divorce, Gavin," Seraphina said firmly. "I want accountability. Julian built his success on a rotten foundation. It's time for it to crumble. But I don't want innocent people to suffer more than necessary." Their strategy became twofold. First, use the leverage to secure an ironclad divorce settlement that protected Seraphina and Pip's financial future completely, including a significant portion of Julian's legitimate assets and full ownership of the penthouse. Second, and more controversially, they decided to anonymously leak a carefully curated selection of the Synapse data privacy issues and the Project Nightingale fraud to a reputable financial journalist known for investigative work rather than directly to Marcus Thorne or the SEC, at least initially. This would create public and shareholder pressure, forcing the Vance Innovations Board to act rather than allowing Thorne to simply swoop in and pick up the pieces for a song, potentially leading to mass layoffs. Julian, already reeling from the divorce proceedings and the initial evidence Seraphina had presented, was served with a new, far more demanding settlement. It was brutal. He tried to fight it, to negotiate, but Fletcher hinted at the new, more damaging information they possessed regarding his business practices. Julian, terrified of that information becoming public, felt the noose tighten. Then the article hit. Vance Innovations innovation, or illusion, whistleblower, data suggests ethical lapses and financial irregularities. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Vance Innovations stock plummeted. The board called an emergency meeting. Regulatory bodies announced impending investigations. Julian was blindsided. He'd expected Seraphina to use the information in the divorce, not to orchestrate a public takedown of his company. He called her, his voice a mixture of fury and desperation. "Seraphina, what have you done?" he raged. "You're destroying everything, my company, my legacy, your legacy." Seraphina's voice was ice. "You destroyed that when you decided to lie, cheat, and steal Julian. You built a house of cards. Did you really think it would stand forever? This isn't just about us anymore. It's about the people you've harmed with your greed." The Vance Innovations board, facing immense pressure, had no choice but to act decisively. Julian Vance was forced to resign as CEO. An interim CEO was appointed, tasked with cleaning up the mess and cooperating with investigators. Marcus Thorne, meanwhile, saw his opportunity, but the public scrutiny meant he couldn't simply dismantle the company. He'd have to make a more considered offer, potentially preserving more jobs. During this maelstrom, Chloe Dubois, having provided her information and received her agreed-upon sum, quietly disappeared. She'd played her part and secured her exit. Seraphina felt no camaraderie with her, only a grim acknowledgement of a temporary, transactional alliance. Julian was now a pariah. His name, once synonymous with innovation, was now linked to scandal and fraud. He was facing potential criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and the complete loss of his social standing. The friends who had once flocked to his side vanished. He was alone, truly alone, in a way Seraphina had been on her birthday. The divorce was finalized quickly. Seraphina got everything she'd asked for. The penthouse was hers, free and clear. Pip's future was secure. But there was one final cruel twist Julian had in store, a desperate act of vengeance. A few weeks after his resignation, as Seraphina was meeting with decorators to transform the cold, minimalist penthouse into a warm home for her and Pip, she received a certified letter. It was from Julian's lawyers. He was contesting paternity. Despite everything, despite the irrefutable proof of his affairs and financial misdeeds, he was now trying to cast doubt on the legitimacy of their child. His child. It was a vile, baseless accusation, a final attempt to wound her, to drag her through more mud. Genevieve was incandescent with rage. Of all the despicable, cowardly things he knows, Pip is his. This is just to hurt you, to tarnish this for you. Seraphina felt a cold fury unlike anything before. This wasn't about business or money. This was about her child. She had wanted accountability, and she had achieved it on a grand scale. But this personal, malicious attack was a line Julian shouldn't have crossed. He wants to play dirty right to the bitter end, does he? Seraphina said, her voice dangerously calm. Fine. Let him. We'll get the paternity test. And when it proves what we both already know, I will ensure it's the final nail in his coffin. Not just his professional coffin, but his personal one. No one will ever look at Julian Vance again without remembering this final pathetic act of spite. She picked up her phone and called Gavin Fletcher. Julian's contesting paternity, Gavin. I want full custody, of course, but I also want to add a defamation suit to his woes once this is settled, and ensure the results of this paternity test are made public. He wants to humiliate me. He has no idea what he's just started. Julian, in his desperation, had miscalculated again. He thought to inflict one last wound, but he had only succeeded in galvanizing Seraphina's resolve to utterly erase him from her life and protect her child with the ferocity of a lioness. His attempt at a final betrayal would only accelerate his complete and utter downfall. The court-ordered paternity test was a swift clinical affair. The results were unequivocal. Julian Vance was with 99.99% certainty the father of Seraphina's unborn child. The news, when Fletcher's office strategically leaked it to counter Julian's earlier insinuation, was the final humiliating blow. His attempt to inflict pain had backfired spectacularly, painting him as not only a cheat and a fraud, but also a spiteful, delusional man. The defamation suit was quietly settled, another drain on his rapidly dwindling resources. Julian was stripped of his company, his wealth and his reputation. He lived in a state of suspended animation, holed up in a sterile, rented apartment in a featureless part of Queens, a world away from the penthouse. The walls were thin. The furniture was cheap laminate, and the view was of a brick wall. It was a purgatory of beige. His days were a blur of sleepless nights and listless afternoons. He'd wake past noon, the stale air thick with the smell of yesterday's takeout. His mornings, once filled with high-stakes calls and strategic power plays, were now spent obsessively scrolling through financial news on a cheap laptop, his fingers tracing his own name as it was dragged through the digital mud. He'd watch his old interviews, a phantom limb pang of his former charisma making him flinch. He was a digital ghost haunting the ruins of his own empire. He rarely went out. Once driven by a desperate need for a decent cup of coffee, he'd ventured to a local cafe. A young woman behind the counter had stared at him, her eyes wide with recognition, before whispering to her co-worker. Julian saw the look they shared, not admiration, but a kind of fascinated disgust. He fled his face, burning the bitter taste in his mouth, having nothing to do with the bad coffee. His lawyer, a harried public defender named Mort, was constantly exasperated. "Julian, you have to help me help you," Mort pleaded during one of their bleak meetings in a cramped fluorescent-lit office. "The prosecution's evidence for the Nightingale fraud is substantial. We can explore a plea, but you need to show some remorse. You need to engage." Julian just stared out the grimy window. "Remorse. They took everything from me, Mort. Seraphina. She took everything." "She didn't take it, Julian. You gave it away." Mort sighed, rubbing his temples. "You handed her the knife, the motive, and a map to the body. This pity party is a luxury you can't afford." Seraphina, by contrast, was blooming. As her due date approached, she poured her energy into reclaiming her space and her identity. The penthouse, once a monument to Julian's ego and her gilded cage, underwent a radical transformation. Cold, imposing sculptures were replaced with vibrant paintings by emerging female artists. The stark white walls were repainted in warm, inviting tones of cream and sage. Julian's cavernous office. The scene of her first painful discovery was converted into a sun-drenched library and playroom. Its shelves filled not with business treatises, but with classic literature, philosophy, and children's books. The room now smelled of lemon polish and baby powder, not stale ambition. It was no longer a showpiece. It was a home. With Genevieve's help, she established the Phoenix Initiative, a foundation dedicated to providing seed funding and mentorship to women-led tech startups focused on ethical innovation. It was a direct, pointed rebuke to Julian's corrupted legacy. Her new advisory board, a sharp, empathetic team of female financial and legal experts, contrasted starkly with the sycophantic yes-men who had surrounded Julian. In their first major review, Seraphina championed a startup whose founder, a brilliant young coder named Priya, had her work on a revolutionary data compression algorithm stolen by a previous male employer. Priya's story mirrored Seraphina's own feelings of being erased. "This is precisely why we're here," Seraphina had declared to the board, her voice resonating with quiet authority. "To ensure that talent is nurtured, not exploited. To build tables, not glass ceilings." The Phoenix Initiative funded Priya, but also provided her with the legal muscle to sue her former company. Months later, Priya won, securing both the patent and a landmark settlement. She became one of the Foundation's most vocal advocates, a tangible symbol of Seraphina's new purpose. The meetings of the board were collaborative, filled with laughter and vigorous debate, a world away from the fear-based loyalty her husband had commanded. A few months later, Seraphina gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Theodore, Gift of God, but to her, he would always be Pip. Holding him in the serene quiet of the nursery, the city lights twinkling gently outside, Seraphina felt a profound sense of peace. The love she felt for her son was a clean, pure flame, powerful enough to burn away the last vestiges of her husband's shadow. Genevieve was there, holding her nephew with tears in her eyes. "You did it, Sarah," she whispered. "You built a better world for him before he even arrived." One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after that fateful birthday, Seraphina was walking Theodore in his stroller through Central Park. The air was cool, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts and damp earth. The leaves were a riot of gold and crimson, crunching under the stroller's wheels. She saw a figure on a distant bench, huddled in a thin coat that was inadequate for the weather. As she drew closer, her steps slowed. It was Julian. He looked shrunken, gaunt, his once impeccable suit now frayed and ill-fitting. The vibrant, charismatic titan of industry was gone, replaced by a ghost haunted by his own choices. He was staring blankly at the children playing on the lawn, his isolation a tangible aura around him. He didn't see her. Seraphina stopped, her heart giving a single, painful throb, an echo of a past life. A complex swirl of emotions washed over her. There was no hatred left, only a quiet, profound sadness. Sadness for the brilliant man he could have been, for the life they might have had, and for the deep character flaw that had poisoned everything. She remembered a time early on when they'd walked this very path, and he'd grabbed her hand, pulling her behind a great oak tree to kiss her, laughing like a boy. He'd whispered promises against her hair, promises of a future that felt as solid as the oak itself. Where did that man go? Had he ever really existed? Or was he just another one of Julian's masterful illusions? One she had been all too willing to believe. He had possessed the world, but had a soul full of holes. Seeing him so completely defeated, she felt not a savage thrill of victory, but the calm finality of closure. He was no longer a monster in her story. He was just a man who had lost his way. A chapter that was now firmly closed. She adjusted Theodore's blanket, her gaze softening as she looked at her son's sleeping face. This was her world now. This pure, unconditional love. This quiet, unshakable strength. She pushed the stroller gently forward, her path taking her away from the bench, away from the enduring shadow of her past, and into the bright promise of her future. From the bench, Julian's gaze drifted. His eyes, dull and unfocused, caught on a woman walking away. There was something about her poise, the confident line of her shoulders, that snagged his attention. She paused to adjust the blanket in a stroller, and the gentle gesture sparked a flicker in the recesses of his memory. An image of a sunlit room, a joyful voice telling him news he'd brushed aside. "We're having a baby, Julian." He saw the elegant woman and the expensive stroller, and for a heart-stopping second, the fog in his mind cleared, shattered by the brilliant autumn light. Seraphina. It wasn't just a recognition. It was a detonation of memory and loss. He could almost smell her perfume, the faint scent of freesia she always wore. He could feel the phantom weight of her hand in his. He saw in that one fleeting glimpse everything he had torched. The quiet mornings, reading the paper together. The way she'd bite her lip when she was concentrating. The unwavering belief in her eyes before he'd extinguished it. He saw not just a woman, but a life, a future, an entire universe he had set on fire for the sake of cheap thrills and a fragile ego. A fleeting pang of loss, sharper and more specific than anything he had felt in months, pierced through his haze of self-pity. He didn't know why it hurt so much. He just knew he was cold, and he was utterly, irrevocably alone. A single hot tear, the first he'd shed through the whole ordeal, traced a path through the grime on his cheek. It wasn't a tear of self-pity, but of genuine soul-crushing loss. Seraphina didn't look back. The millionaire's wife was gone. In her place stood Seraphina Vance's mother, philanthropist, survivor, and architect of her own destiny. The world had tried to take everything from her. Instead, she had taken back her life and built something far more valuable on the ruins. Her son gurgled happily, and Seraphina smiled, her face turned towards the sun. Years passed. Julian took a plea deal, his sentence shortened for his cooperation in untangling the web of shell corporations he'd created. He served 3 years in a low-security federal prison and was released into a world that had completely forgotten him. He took a job as a night-shift data entry clerk, the irony lost on no one but himself. Seraphina's life, meanwhile, continued to expand. The Phoenix Initiative became a major force in the tech world. Theodore grew into a kind, inquisitive boy, with his mother's calm eyes and a startlingly bright smile. One afternoon when Theodore was 7, he came home from school upset. A boy had cheated in a race and then bragged about winning. Seraphina sat with him in the library, the late afternoon sun streaming through the large windows. "It's not fair," Theodore said, his chin trembling. "No, it's not," Seraphina agreed, stroking his hair. "But Pip, you need to understand something. Some people think that winning is the only thing that matters, no matter how you do it. They think being clever is more important than being good. But the trophy they get feels empty, because they know they didn't earn it. Your father, he was one of those people." It was the first time she had spoken of him so directly. He won a lot of things, but he lost the most important one himself. The best prize, the only one that really matters, is being able to look at yourself in the mirror and be proud of the person you see. You ran a good race and you were honest. That makes you a true winner. She would teach her son about strength and kindness, about integrity and respect. She would give him a legacy not of wealth, but of worth. And that was a treasure no one could ever take away. What did you think of Seraphina's journey from heartbreak to empowerment? Could you have been as strategic in her shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience and retribution captivated you, please give this video a huge like, share it with someone who needs to hear that strength can be found in the deepest betrayals, and make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next jaw-dropping story. Thanks for watching.